Bannerlord drops a new patch, version 1.2.10, and let's be honest, we're all a little disappointed. Right? We're a little disappointed. Now, crashes do need to be addressed, and I think sometimes you can get a little spoiled with how smooth a game can run. My Bannerlord hardly ever crashes. So I appreciate these crash fixes because stability is key to game enjoyment. But I think we were all looking for a little more. And look, these fixes are nice. One that kind of stands out here, the bug fix where certain crafting recipes were unable to produce legendary items, particularly axes, because they only had 3 pieces. Now you can produce that legendary axe. Oh, my Sturgia boys, that's a nice change for you. I know a lot of you guys really love the smithing. But other than that, I think we can all agree that these fixes are a little meh. And you can see, first comment up goes right in on Tail Worlds. Nope, just another crappy beta fixes. Oh, God. Give it to them. The truth is, we're all wanting 1.3. And I think a lot of the frustration really comes from 2 areas. The first is when you play the game and the battles are just fantastic, but it's not long before you see it's kind of shallow in the other areas. And you can easily imagine how magnificent this game would be if those things were tuned up and addressed. The other problem is a lot of this community, I know for me, this is true as well. We come from games like Total War, Crusader Kings, just a host of other strategy games that have a little more depth in certain areas, and we'd love to see that brought into Bannerlord because there's just nothing like a Bannerlord battle. There's just nothing like it. It's just an amazing experience, but it needs some addressing, and I thought I'd just go over some of the areas that I would like to see them address. So, from the top, the first thing is collecting companions. The way you collect companions in the game now is you basically run around and play companion Lotto, where you keep looking for that particular companion you need with those attributes you want. And to be quite honest, it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good having to run around the entire map just to get somebody to do something you need. A mod that did this spectacularly was Distinguished Service, where if one of your soldiers got a certain level of kills or had an outstanding battle and they set themselves apart from the rabble, then you could promote them to captaincy or companionship and give them traits and attributes to turn them into whatever you needed. In the options, you could give them scouting or smithing or riding, tactics. You could kind of customize them out to whatever your army needed. And it was very thematic, it had a very nice flow to it. It was just great. You could pick the type of companion you wanted, whether it was a bowman or a cavalryman or an infantry. And they had to earn it. Now, they were pretty strong and they came out of the gate pretty strong, but that kind of stuff can always be tweaked. But I really preferred this mods method over just running around tavern to tavern, hoping to God that you can finally find a scout or a steward or whatever. And in this way, it made it very smooth. It made the gameplay very smooth and it made it very loreful. So I really liked Distinguished Service and the way that it did companionship. And I'd like to see them integrate something like that into the game. People always say, well, you can go mod it. But as you can see here, this mod hasn't been updated for a year and a half. Depending on mods can be kind of a sketchy proposition, especially when this company likes to drop random patches that screw up all the mods but barely add anything new to the game. And so you get some crash fixes and some bug fixes, but now your mods don't work. So it's like, well, now you're having to pick either or, and it just doesn't feel good. Running around hoping you can find the right companion sucks. And it's something I'd like to see them change. The other big one for me is the campaign is just completely too static. Almost every game is predictable. Valandia is going to get rolling. No one really punishes the Aserai. Maybe they'll take one of their outer towns, but for the most part, we can expect the Khazate to roll up Tyal and the Northern Empire, and Britannia to get stomped almost every time. Now, there's always some deviation, of course, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent what happens within the campaign, and it largely depends on what the player does to impact the game. And I think that sucks. I would love for it to be much more dynamic. So there would be times when Valandia steamrolls, Britannia steamrolls. I think every time you load into a game, it should not be predictable in what the campaign is going to play out like. It's very frustrating when you want to help a faction, but really they haven't lost anything. They're just the same as they've ever been, and they're not really in trouble. So you really can't come through and help them because they really don't need your help. And yeah, they'll lose a town here or there, but eventually, if you let it play out, they'll take it back. Now, the exception, of course, is Valandia. If you play the game out into the late game, tends to get rolling, and the Khazate as well. But every faction should have the possibility to come out roaring. I don't know how you adjust this. One way I thought of is that you could randomly assign different factions more nobles. Every game starts with Valandia having more nobles than most other factions. But maybe you load up another faction with more nobles and they're just more heavy-handed throughout the campaign. It kind of tilts it in their favor, having bigger armies. Maybe you could give them an auto-resolve buff for a little bit so that they just tend to win a lot of battles and they really get to steamrolling. From the moment you hit start campaign and you come into the map, one man and his old sumpter horse, you should be not able to predict what's going to happen. And I think it's a big problem in both fun and replayability. I don't know what the best way to address that would be, but those are some of my ideas. But it definitely is something that needs to be addressed. Staying on the topic of dynamic campaigns, another thing that needs to be included is dynamic events. Civil wars, wars of succession. If a faction is really getting thumped, maybe it breaks apart. I mean, things should be falling apart in this time. It should be chaotic. It should be wild. Viking invasions. Maybe a giant horse archer clan from the eastern part off the map comes in to invade the Khazate and take over Manchug. There should be events taking place on the map that occur that dramatically impact the campaign and cause factions to hurt. Whether it's plagues, famines, invasions, whatever, going back to making the campaign unpredictable, chaotic, and hard, rather than just this static place that you run around, collect companions, build up your army, and crush everybody. And then there's certain things that I just think need adjustments, that they work, but they could work better. The first one, bandits. The way bandits work, they just kind of randomly spawn in places. I would like to see where you could clean up an area and it stays safe, but if a village gets raided or there's a time of war and enemy armies come marching through, that it increases the likelihood that bandits start forming. And I'd like them to start forming up pretty quick. And then if you don't get in there and address it and knock out that bandit camp, instead of just running around in 4s and 8s and 16s and just really not having impact on the game, I wish they'd start gathering up into big groups and then they start raiding villages. They start causing mayhem in your lands, and it's something that has to be addressed. As it is now, yeah, they'll hit a villager party every once in a while, but for the most part, it's just kind of a pain in the ass to constantly have to clear these things out because there's no really rhyme or reason to how they're going to come back. They're just going to respawn pretty soon. And so I would like to see it where you could handle the situation and keep your lands pretty clean, but then wartime strikes, your villages are getting raided, enemy armies are rolling through your towns, desertion happens. And so then these bandit parties start sprouting up. And if too many of them get going, then they create a bandit camp, and then they start pumping out real numbers, and they become a real problem that you have to deal with. Of course, this would require some AI updating so that the AI could handle these in their factions too. But just as it is now, where they just randomly spawn and you just go kill them, it's fine and it's not bad. I just think it could be improved upon. And another thing that could most certainly be done a little better is caravans. As it is right now, it's barely worth the money. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I think if you're on an Aserai campaign, it tends to. But at the same time, you can also put one out and it immediately gets captured, and then you're just out that money. And so in the end, it's really just safer to keep the money, especially 10, 15,000. Now in the late game, that doesn't really matter. That can be a couple items you loot. But in the early game, when you probably could really use that caravan money, they're just entirely too vulnerable, I guess is the best way to put it, to really depend on them as a type of income. And so they either need to make a lot more money to make it worth the risk, or they need to be not as risky of an investment. As it is right now, I just skip them. And it's not to say I haven't had good caravans. I have, and they are useful for leveling up people's skills to a degree. But I think we can all agree they could be better. And that's what I would like to see, some improvement there. Either increase the profit and make the risk worth taking, or make it a less risky proposition. One of the most amazing experiences in this game is being in a siege. It feels like you're in a damn movie. It's incredible. But on the siege map, the AI doesn't know to hide its siege engines. And so it's very predictable that you're going to have an advantage over them. I would like to see the AI be able to hide its siege engines and bring them all out like we're able to. I think it's only fair. It would make it a lot more risky and a lot more difficult. And the reality is, if you have 4 mangonels up and they hit your walls, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to take it. The AI just does not handle the building and deployment of siege weaponry well, because it only builds them one at a time. And we all know what happens. It gets destroyed before the second one's up, and they can never get any momentum. And so that needs to be fixed. I think the adjustment here is, rather than have the siege engines be built and then have to hide them, they should be built hidden, and then you should move them into position. And maybe while you're moving them into position, they take a little extra fire, so the defending siege weapons that are higher up, seem like they'd have more range, should get a couple shots off while you're putting them in position to counterfire. But then they would all come in at the same time, and that would at least give the AI a fighting chance to not have to siege a castle going into basically artillery fire. Another adjustment you could make with sieges is that I think level 1 and level 2 walls should not be able to support 4 siege engines. It's like even level 1 walls can have 4 siege engines. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Or maybe they could only have 2 big siege engines and 2 ballistas. I don't know. There's ways to make it so that keeps don't just get to build artillery that keeps the enemy out. And I think that's something that could use adjustment. Love sieges. They're an absolute blast, but they could use just a little tuning. And this one will probably get me some hate, but I just believe it with all my heart. It is just entirely too easy to get noble troops. The changes I would like to see to this are, number one, I think the way you get something like a Battanian Fian should change. So rather than it being its own separate line of advancement and its own troop type, I would like to see it brought into, so you would need to bring in an archer unit here in the middle and then make them good. I mean, make them real good. Battania should have good archers, but then eventually, the same way you level these guys up with XP, you could level them up from here to the noble troop. having them start out as elite troops, I mean, they just get too awesome too quick, and they're just the best at anything. And it makes it pointless to recruit most of this other stuff, because why have one of these when you can have a fiend? You can easily afford them, and they're almost easier to get and build up because they don't die. Completely negates the other troops in a lot of factions. Consguard, another great example, when you can just easily acquire these noble troops. So I'd like to see them add in to each of the troop trees a way to get down to the noble troop, but then you'd have a regular archers all the way down. And then with a lot of experience, every once in a while, you'd be able to get you a Fiend. And I think being able to have 200 Fiends is ridiculous. I think if you're going to have elite and badass troops, they should come very slowly. And when you lose them, it should be catastrophic, because you're like, God, I got to build them back up again. And of course, as the game goes on, it would get easier, especially when you consider things like the steward tree, where you can donate weapons and armor. And then if you have high roguery, you get more weapons and armor. Well, that can create kind of a snowball effect where you're really pumping a lot of XP into your army. Then you could kick out these noble troops a little faster. But I think the way it stands now, where you just go recruit a bunch of noble troops and you have a bunch of elite noble troops as a level 2 clan, is ridiculous. And that's the other part. I don't think you should even be able to kick out noble troops until you're at least clan tier 4. I think that you should unlock the ability to start kicking out your noble troops at clan tier 4, and then you should kick them out very slowly. It should take 3 or 4 times the XP it takes to get one of these guys. I mean, maybe 5 or 6 times, 10 times. I don't know, but you should not be able to get armies full of them very quickly. You could get them quicker, maybe make some traits that require less XP for noble troops in the leadership tree or something. I don't know. But the point is, having armies full of noble troops negates entire troop trees and units and really discourages using anything else. It gives the player a crazy advantage over the AI when you're consistently bringing these noble troop armies to battle, and you really haven't earned them. You recruited them by the bucket load out of castle villages. Another option is, instead of flat XP, you could do it like that distinguished service mod and make it so that if they got 10 kills in one battle or something and really stood out, then they would get the option to upgrade into the noble troop tree. But as it stands now, where you can just recruit all these guys at once and make an army of fiends, it's just ridiculous. It makes the game trivial. And if you're gonna make these troops this good, I mean, when you look at this bow skill 260, I mean, Palatine Guard, the max level archer for the Empire, has 160. And these guys are also some of the best two-handed troops in the game, with 220 two-handed. And that's fine. It's awesome to have badass troops. I just don't know that you should be able to have 300 of them. And especially as a level 3 clan, that's just, I don't know. I don't like it. So I would like them to adjust the acquisition of noble troops. Overall, I think these types of troops should be the exception on the battlefield, not the rule. And I think that would make the game a little more challenging. And I think it would actually make noble troops a lot more fun and interesting. One of the last things I'll mention, I would really like for them to uncouple attributes with your background story. Because to me, this is your story. This is your thematic playthrough. And this should determine your starting position and your gear and things like that. Whereas building your character should just be your own decision. And very consistently, this choice over here might be great, but then it sucks in its attribute and skill point allotment, or vice versa. So I would really like them to uncouple this combination and just give you a set amount of attribute points and skill points to start out with, and you can just distribute them how you want to. And then over here, like I said, this should determine your starting equipment and or your starting position. There's other things and other ways you could play into it, but I would like to see these two separated. Oftentimes, it just makes more sense to pick what's going to give you better allotments rather than what you want your background story to be. And that sucks in a game where I believe imagination is the foundation of a great playthrough. To have to kind of manipulate your story so that you can start off the way you want to sucks. So I'd like to see them break these things up into two separate parts of character creation. In the end, I think this game is absolutely phenomenal. And my number one frustration with Tale Worlds is that they don't seem to recognize it. Now, I read on a subreddit post, someone who lives in Turkey said they just moved offices and built a new office. So maybe they've been kind of busy with that. But if they think that this game is feature complete, they're out of their minds. It could be so much more than it is, and in the best way. I don't think there's anything like a Bannerlord campaign, for all its faults, in modern gaming right now. I don't think there's another strategy game that even touches a Bannerlord battle. I'm not even interested in it. I played Warhammer Total War, all the historical Total Wars. I've played Crusader Kings. I play a ton of first-person shooters, Warcraft, everything. There is nothing like being in a Bannerlord battle. It is the shit. But you come out here to the campaign map, and it can start getting a little frustrating pretty quick due to some of the mechanics and stuff that are in play. And in the end, your frustration really just comes from your hope, because you're playing this game and you can imagine what it could be, especially when you go back, for some of us who come back from Warband and the mods that were in there and just what they were able to do with that. Can you imagine that type of effort put into this game? And I'll just tell you, I'm ready. Bring on the DLC or whatever. If you need more money to put more into Bannerlord, I'm here. I got an open wallet. I don't give a shit. I'm not even going to lie about it. I would love to see this game given more love, more development, things improved upon, the things that I've mentioned. I know there's other things in the game that you guys will mention, but I think this game is without peer. And I'll die on that hill because I love Bannerlord. I hope you guys enjoy the content I make. Speaking of the content, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to launch a series where I start from level 1 and I'm going to take each phase, the early game, the mercenary phase, the vassal phase, and then the kingdom development phase. And I'm going to show you from all my experience some tips and tricks and just kind of what I do and the fun I have doing it, because I love it. I love doing this. I love making this content for you guys, and I greatly appreciate the support. I know we're all desperate for 1.3, and it's almost to the point that I'm anxious about it, because if all we get some hairstyles, oh my God, I'm going to be worried for Tail Worlds. We're going to be the bandit camps forming up with pitchforks and torches, huh? I love Bannerlord. I love making content for you guys, and I really appreciate all the support. More coming your way, and hopefully, in time, 1.3 is coming our way as well. Thanks for listening. Bokelholm out.